with a pretty leaky spacecraft. Speaking of lunar landers, hopefully you remember the slim Japanese lunar lander that started its journey to the moon about 4 months ago. Well, it has finally made its landing attempt just yesterday. Now, it took a relatively long path from Earth, finally getting into orbit around the moon at the end of December. Watching the landing attempt, though, that was nail-biting. JAXA was trying to land slim in a zone of less than 100 meters, so if everything actually went to plan, it would be the most precise landing on the moon ever. This was really exciting to watch with everything looking great. Right before the landing, Slim kicked out the 2 smaller lunar rovers that it was carrying, and then kicked off this unique touchdown where it simply tips over and falls down on these shock-absorbent legs placed on the other side. The great news is that it touched down and began sending data, so success in that regard, but for reasons that were still breaking at the time, it was not generating any power. The immediate thoughts are that it perhaps rolled over or that its landing location ended up out of direct sunlight, but check out the latest news feeds on that when you get a second because, yeah, as I say, the news was just breaking. I think it is wonderful, though, that the soft landing on the moon was at least partially successful. Now, NASA and Lockheed Martin have finally unveiled the X-59 experimental supersonic aircraft, which I think is a pretty astounding sight given how unusual it looks. We've talked about the X-59 before, of course, but it was still in the early development phase, but finally it is ready to take the first test flight. NASA's Quest mission is designed to fly at 1.4 times the speed of sound, around 925 miles per hour, all while minimizing the sonic disruptions that usually comes from vehicles breaking the sound barrier. This presentation was held at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works in Palmdale. For all of the spaceflight enthusiasts, you may wonder why I think that this is so interesting. Well, with this project, I think the X-59 is more than just an aircraft. To me, supersonic flight is a kind of sweet middle ground blurring the boundaries between the air travel and the space travel that we all watch so closely. Now, as we know from history around the Concorde, commercial supersonic flight over land has been restricted pretty heavily due to the loud sonic booms that are experienced by everybody below. The X-59, however, has this innovative design that aims to address this issue with the sleek shape, which includes that long, thin, tapered nose and an engine mounted on the top with an exhaust deck to minimize the shockwaves from merging. Now, on this demo vehicle, there are no forward-facing windows, so the test pilot needs to rely simply on external vision systems consisting of high-resolution cameras and monitors to provide that unobstructed view. Next up, there will be a series of integrated system tests, engine runs, and taxi testing, and the first flights should happen later this year. The idea is to fly the X-59 over a number of US cities to gather public feedback on its sonic impact. Rather than the thunderous boom, we hope that the sonic booms produced by this aircraft would be no louder than a car door being slammed nearby. This data will be vital for the FAA and the international regulators to see if they can begin relaxing the restrictions around supersonic travel over populated areas. I really hope that we will once again start to see a new era in aviation, a time again where we can travel faster than the speed of sound comfortably with a variety of consumer aircraft. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe.
And Americans and Europeans are the most likely people to be in debt, with mortgages, student debt, and credit card loans. But just because someone has debt doesn't mean that they're suffering from the same economic hardship as someone with no debt in one of the least developed countries in the world. An American medical student might graduate university with a large negative net worth, but they will soon start earning a high income and will not be living in poverty for long. I did a Google search for the most indebted person in the world and found that it's Jerome Curviel, the French rogue trader, who still owes $6.3 billion to his former employer. According to Wikipedia, Curviel, the world's poorest man, works as a computer security consultant today. Apparently in 2014 he made a pilgrimage on foot to Italy to meet with the Pope to discuss the problems of modern capitalism. The financial criminal Jordan Belfort owes $100 million in restitution to his former clients, but he seems to be doing just fine too.
You know me, I'm a wealthy person, right? Thank God for that, all right? And I wear really expensive watches.
2024 is the biggest election year in world history, with elections being held in more than 50 countries around the world. 8 of the 10 most populous countries are holding elections this year, so about half of the adult population of the globe will have the opportunity to vote. The issue of economic inequality and how to tackle it is likely to be a central issue in many of these elections, so it might be worthwhile digging into the data to try and understand it better. So let's start with global numbers. If you as an individual earn more than $60,000 a year after taxes, you are in the top 1% of highest incomes globally. If you have a household after-tax income of $130,000 per year or greater, you are also in the top 1%. According to my YouTube channel analytics, 70% of my viewers are in the top 1%, so well done. According to Statista, the majority of people in the top 1% globally are Americans, and there are around as many 1%ers in the United States as there are in the next 9 countries combined. Top 1% income varies significantly by country. According to the US Census Bureau, real median household income in the United States was just under $75,000. To be in the top 1% of earners in the United States, you had to earn just under $500,000 a year. Now, obviously, the top 1% includes a very wide range of people, everything from someone who earns $500,000 a year to Jeff Bezos, who makes more than that per hour. According to Bloomberg data, to be in the top 1% in India, you had to earn over $77,000. In Australia and the UK, you had to earn over $250,000. And in the United Arab Emirates, the top 1% earn over $922,000 per year. There is, of course, a difference between income and wealth, so we need to cover that. And there is a lot of data on how people earn top 1% incomes, where they live, and how they live. There are lots of controversies, too, around how data on wealth and inequality are calculated, which we'll get to shortly. Finance can, of course, become quite intertwined with politics, especially on topics like wealth inequality and taxation. So I was lucky to have a subscription to Ground News, today's video sponsor, to aid in keeping a balanced perspective. It's a website and app that shows you news coverage from across the world and political spectrum, providing a data-driven breakdown of each story so you can cut through sensational language and come to your own independent conclusions. For example, ahead of California Governor Gavin Newsom's recent budget presentation, the Wall Street Journal published an article with his photo saying Democrats want to tax the wealthy to fill the state's $68 billion budget hole. This led to Newsom calling them out, denying their allegations. Using Ground News, I was able to see all sides and learn more about the facts of the proposed California wealth tax, including the press release from the governor and how different publications chose to report on it. Getting your news from only one source can lead to a skewed perspective, which is why Ground News was designed to provide you with all of the available information, like a news source's political bias, ownership, and reliability. credibility based on independent news monitoring organizations. I think it's an important service and feel more confident sharing factual information with my viewers because of Ground News. Go to ground.news/Patrick Boyle or click my link in the description to get 30% off the unlimited access Vantage subscription, the plan that I use to provide you informational breakdowns on the economy. So now that we've covered income, what about wealth or net worth? Well, to be in the top 1% in terms of net worth globally, you need to have a net worth of $1 million or more approximately. Of course, once again, that data varies significantly from country to country. According to Knight Frank, the top 1% of Americans have a net worth of $5 million or more. In Singapore, France, Hong Kong, and the UK, the top 1% have a net worth of $3.5 million or more. In China, to be in the top 1%, you need a net worth of close to $1 million. In India, you need $175,000 or more. And at the very top, there's Monaco, where you need to have an income of over $12 million to be in the top 1%. At the bottom is Kenya, where you need a net worth of over $20,000 to be in the top 1%. I've been thinking for quite some time about moving to Zimbabwe, as I have this $100 trillion note that I bought on eBay a few years ago. I imagine it would allow me to live like a king. Oh, hold on, it seems it's only worth about $3, but I think I only paid 40 cents for it, so I'm up nicely on my foreign exchange speculation, but I might have to stay here for now. A lot of the big discussions around the differences between the 1% and the 99% came from the Occupy Wall Street movement, which occurred in the wake of the global financial crisis. There's been a lot of discussion on how the 1% make their money, their political opinions, and their lifestyles. A 2021 paper from the CSEF makes the point that for the purposes of analysis, the top 5% might be a more useful cutoff than the top 1%, as a lot of the data on narrowly defined groups like the top 1% or even the top 0.1% tends to have problems and may not be very accurate. I've looked at data from the Federal Reserve, the Tax Policy Center, Census data, and the Congressional Budget Office in making this video, and often the numbers reported don't align very well at all. A lot of the academic research on this topic uses tax data and survey data, both of which have flaws, but the CSEF paper highlights that when you zoom out to 5% from 1%, the different sources start to align a lot better. Some of the discrepancies between the various data sources relate to changes in tax laws, movement of retirement accounts, and things like that, which mean that data on the top 1% is more flawed than data on the top 5%. We'll get into some of those controversies near the end of the video. Hopefully you can see that inequality research is a complicated field, which is often extremely politicized, and you should take any research on the topic, including the information in this video, with a pinch of salt, as the data can be and often is twisted by people who are agitating for a political agenda, both on the right and on the left. A New York Times article from 2012 described the 1% as being a far more varied group than the Wall Street bosses that many people imagined at the peak of the Occupy movement. According to the author's research, the top 1% were nearly twice as likely to be married as the general population and have more children than middle and upper middle class families do. A vast majority of 1%ers graduated from college, and in 27% of couples, both partners have advanced degrees. Doctors, according to the article, are more likely than any other profession in America to be in the top 1%. In top 1% married households, men were found to be earning 75% of the money, which stands in contrast to the population in general, as today in almost half of US households, women are now out-earning or earning very similar incomes to their husbands. In marriages where women earn more than their husbands, Pew Research found that women earn a median of $88,000 to their husbands' $35,000, out-earning them by $53,000 a year. Richard Reeves on the Big Think YouTube channel pointed out how different male performance is at the different ends of the income spectrum.
I think one of the challenges with this debate is that if you're talking to women and men who are, say, at the top of the economic ladder, 4-year college degrees, decent incomes, they look around and they don't see some of these issues. But that's not the same for working class men. That's not the same for men lower down the economic ladder. So there's a danger that we're so busy, to borrow Sheryl Sandberg's phrase, so busy leaning in that we don't look down. The reality for men further down the ladder is very different.
The 1% were found by the New York Times to be 3 times more likely than the 99% to work more than 50 hours per week, and were also more likely than average to be self-employed. Twice as many 1%ers as 99%ers were reported to have some inherited money. The affluent families in Nassau County, New York, interviewed in the article, were reported to describe themselves as being practically middle class, saying that property values and taxes in Nassau County are so high that their incomes don't go very far. Overall, the 1% are more likely than average to live in parts of the country with a higher cost of living, and that's often where highly paid jobs exist, and thus their high incomes are often offset by high expenses. So what about politics then? Well, according to a Gallup poll, 1/3 of the nation's 1% identify themselves as Republican, 41% as independents, and 26% as Democrats. The poll found very little difference between the political views of the 1% and the population in general, other than being slightly more likely to be Republican. A paper by Oliver Denk on the socio-demographic and job characteristics of the top 1% earners in Europe found that high earners in Europe tend to be predominantly male, aged between 40 and 59 years old, and have a university education. Much like in the United States, health professionals make up a large group of top earners in several European countries. Health professionals were found to exceed the number of business and finance professionals among the top 1% in Finland, France, Italy, Portugal, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. The top 1% of earners were found to work in industries like finance, IT, and in senior management positions like chief executive.